That room isn't yours anymore. My stepmother said it while holding a new brass key between two fingers like it was jewelry. Not cruel, not loud, not even dramatic. That was what made it so cold. Celeste had a talent for making betrayal look tasteful. For one full second, I honestly thought I was too tired to understand what I was seeing. I had just gotten home from a 14-hour day, and the kind of tired I was carrying wasn't normal tired anymore. It was the kind that settles behind your eyes and makes the world arrive half a second late. My shoulders still ached from the strap of my laptop bag. My calves were tight from standing all day. My blouse smelled faintly like toner, stale coffee, and the dry, recycled air of hospital admin floors. The hallway light was on. My bedroom door was shut. The lock had been changed. And everything I owned, my clothes, shoes, files, winter coat, my mother's recipe tin, the lamp I bought with my first real paycheck, even the framed photo of me and my mother from when I was 16, had been packed into thick black contractor bags and lined carefully along the wall. Not thrown, not piled, lined up, as if this had been organized with intention, as if someone had spent the day rehearsing my removal. My father stood 3 feet behind her, silent, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. That was the part that hurt more than the bags. Not that Celeste had done it, that he had watched her do it. My name is Mara Ellison. I was 30 years old the night I came home and found out that in my father's house, I could be erased without warning. And if I'm honest, the lock on the door was not the first thing they had changed. It was just the first one I could see. I worked as a medical billing specialist for a regional hospital network. It wasn't glamorous work. No one at parties leaned in when you said it. No one told you it sounded exciting. But the longer you do that kind of job, the more you understand that adult life is held together by fragile, invisible systems people only notice when they fail. You learn that one missed insurance update can become 6 phone calls, 3 rejected claims, and a debt no one can quite explain. You learn that "we thought it went through" is one of the most dangerous sentences in the English language. You learn that families can look normal from the outside, right up until one late payment, one unopened envelope, one denial letter, one final notice turns their whole life inside out. That was my skill. I noticed. I remembered. I fixed. And because I fixed, everyone in that house slowly built their lives on the assumption that I always would. My mother died when I was 19. Breast cancer. Aggressive. Fast. The kind that changes the temperature of a family in less than a year and then leaves everybody pretending they survived it the same way. We didn't. My father didn't become tender with grief. He became hollow. He still went to work, still paid some bills, still occupied rooms, but the inner labor of living, the remembering, the planning, the follow-through, the emotional steadiness, fell loose from him like parts shaking off a machine no one was maintaining. Someone had to pick them up. I did. At first it felt temporary. I made calls because someone had to. I tracked appointments because someone had to. I reminded my father to eat. I sorted the mail. I learned the pharmacy line. I sat on hold with insurance while studying at the kitchen table. I made tea for my father when he forgot to boil water and then forgot he had wanted tea in the first place. I was 19 and grieving too. But grief in that house only counted if it made you softer and less demanding. Mine made me efficient. No one called it grief after that. They called it maturity. That was the first lie. What really happened was that I became useful faster than I became whole. And once a family learns they can survive by leaning on your competence, they don't rush to ask what that competence is costing you. There is a very specific loneliness in being the daughter who gets praised for holding up so well. People say it like admiration. What they mean is, Thank God you're not making your pain expensive for the rest of us. By 24, I knew the machinery of that house better than anyone in it. I knew my father's retirement login because he kept locking himself out. I knew when the car insurance renewed. I knew which utility could be paid 4 days late without triggering a shutoff warning. I knew which pharmacy still filled Celeste's migraine prescription fast when she claimed she was too overwhelmed to call it in herself. I knew Ava had maxed out a card she swore she barely used. I knew where the county tax notices came. I knew the difference between a late fee and the first step toward legal review. I knew which doctor my father was pretending he didn't need to see again. Nobody asked me to know those things. That's what people always say later. Nobody asked. As if dependence submits a request form before it starts draining years out of your life. Celeste entered ours 3 years after my mother died. At first, she was careful. Soft voice, measured smile, casseroles, sympathy, the kind of composure people admire when they don't have to live under it. She did not arrive in our lives like a villain. She arrived like relief. That was part of what made her effective. She understood that open cruelty scares people too early. Strategy doesn't. She studied the house before she ever tried to run it. She studied my father's loneliness, his guilt, his need to be led without ever admitting he was being led. She studied Ava's laziness and entitlement and learned exactly how much to indulge and how much to disguise. And she studied me. That was what I didn't understand until much later. She learned my reflex to step in, my discomfort with mess, my need to prevent collapse before anyone else noticed it. She learned that I would rather carry too much than watch everything rot in public. Once she knew that, she hardly had to fight me directly. She just positioned herself around it. Visible care got her the credit. Invisible care got left to me. She redecorated the living room, hosted Christmas, remembered birthdays publicly, told neighbors and church friends and anyone willing to listen that blending a complicated family had been such a learning process. Meanwhile, I was the one making sure the homeowner's insurance didn't lapse. I was the one fixing claim errors. I was the one on hold with the hospital pharmacy benefits line because someone had changed an address but not updated the card information. I was the one quietly paying the Wi-Fi bill twice because Ava's temporary loan was, once again, not temporary. I was the one correcting the spelling on tax documents because my father signed anything put in front of him and never read the second page. Celeste never thanked me. She did something more corrosive. She used my labor as evidence against me. She treated my involvement as proof that I was too entangled, too present, too difficult to dislodge. At first it came dressed as concern. Mara, sweetheart, you don't have to carry everything. Then, when I didn't step back fast enough, it sharpened. You know, at some point helping becomes hovering. This house might breathe easier if everybody had their own life. Your father worries you've made yourself too central around here. Too central. That phrase stayed with me because it was such an elegant way to describe unpaid labor as ego. My father, being who he was, never fully agreed with her in front of me. He did something weaker. He softened around her interpretation of events until repeating it required less courage than resisting it. That was his cowardice. Not aggression. Delegation. He outsourced moral responsibility to the strongest person in the room and called it peace. There were little moments, too. The kind you don't recount at first because each one seems too small to justify your hurt. Celeste started moving things without telling me. My mother's serving bowl went into attic storage because it didn't fit the room anymore. The framed photo on the piano disappeared for 2 weeks and came back in the downstairs hallway instead of the living room. She began referring to my mother as before we reorganized things, as if the dead could be redecorated out of a house. Once, I came home and found Celeste had gone through the kitchen file drawer and relabeled it. Household, medical, taxes, misc. My handwriting replaced by hers. It made me angrier than it should have. Or maybe exactly as angry as it should have. Because that was what she was always doing, taking over the visible version of order while leaving me to manage the collapsing substance behind it. Ava was simpler, harder to tolerate, but simpler. 22. Pretty in the glossy, easy way people forgive too much for. Raised by a woman who understood leverage and a household that kept handing her cushioned landings, she treated responsibility like something for slower people. She left dishes, forgot deadlines, borrowed money, lost receipts, started fights, cried when cornered, and somehow remained convinced she was the one everyone burdened. Every time something in her life cracked, the pieces slid toward me. Can you cover this till Friday? Can you print that for me? Can you tell Mom to stop overreacting? Can you handle Dad? Can you just fix this one thing? I did, for years. Not because I enjoyed being useful, because I knew what happened in that house when no one stepped up. Things didn't stop. They rotted. That is the part people from healthier homes don't always understand. In some families, if you don't do the work, no one argues about whose turn it is. The work simply decays in place until it becomes your fault for seeing it and not handling it. The first real crack came when I got promoted at work to senior billing coordinator. Better salary, more responsibility, more direct access to compliance review, claims escalation, and financial recovery cases. It should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like provocation. Celeste started commenting every time I missed dinner. Ava rolled her eyes when I came in late and said I was never around for what actually matters. My father asked, in that falsely casual tone weak men use when they are asking a real question sideways, if I was planning to move out now that work was making me so ambitious. That word, ambitious. He said it like a warning, not a compliment. And the truth is, I had started thinking about leaving. Not in a dreamlike, someday way, practically. Checking rent prices, looking at neighborhoods closer to work, calculating what I could afford if I lived smaller and quieter and farther from that house. I hadn't told them. I wasn't ready. But people who fear losing control of you can often sense your interior departure before you say it aloud. I started saying no in smaller ways first. No, I couldn't stay up after a double day to sort Celeste's insurance forms because she got overwhelmed by websites. No, I wouldn't lend Ava another $300 she would call temporary and then never mention again. No, I was not going to keep pretending my father's unopened envelopes were random clutter and not a slow-moving emergency. Those no's changed the air in the house more than any argument ever had. Celeste became sweeter in public and colder in private. Ava became openly spiteful. My father became irritable in the way weak men do when they know someone else is right but are more loyal to comfort than truth. The thing that triggered everything, though, was paperwork. It always comes down to paperwork. Not a dramatic affair, not some cinematic family secret with hidden children and safety deposit boxes. Paperwork. One Tuesday afternoon, I got home early and found an unopened certified letter shoved under a pile of grocery flyers and hardware coupons on the kitchen counter. Urgent. Property tax delinquency review. My father's name. I stared at it long enough for my stomach to go cold. Then I opened it. There are moments when your mind understands the scale of the problem before your body catches up. The taxes were months behind. A late mortgage notice had been folded inside, with Celeste's neat handwriting in the corner. Call later. maybe ask for extension, as if the possible loss of the house was just another inconvenience she could smooth over with the right voice and a weekday morning. I read every page twice. Then I opened my laptop. Then the county portal. Then the insurance dashboard. That was when the full shape of it appeared. The homeowner's insurance had not merely lapsed. It had been switched, partially updated, then rejected after a failed payment. The grace period was nearly gone. And because the mortgage servicer required active coverage, one failure was now pressing against another. Not a mess, a collapse. Layered, quiet, already in motion. It felt like standing in a room and realizing the wallpaper had been hiding water damage for years. And then there was more. A second notice I found scanned in the portal history but never physically filed. A billing adjustment on my father's medical account that had never been completed. A payment arrangement that had been started and then abandoned. A property tax reminder that Celeste had opened weeks earlier and marked for follow-up. She had known. Not the abstract version of known where someone is overwhelmed and avoiding facts. She had actively known. When my father came home, I put the papers on the table in front of him. He looked startled, then defensive, then angry, not ashamed, angry, as if discovering the truth was the insult, not creating the conditions for it. Celeste came in halfway through and did what people like her do best. She reframed. "We were handling it," she said. "We?" I asked. Neither of them answered. Ava wandered in with a drink in her hand and asked what was going on, as if she lived in a hotel and had merely stumbled into someone else's crisis. I looked at all three of them and felt something in me turn from exhausted to exact. "You are 2 months from a legal nightmare. The insurance is hanging by a thread, and neither of you told me," I said. Celeste folded her arms. "No one asked you to take over this family." That line hit me like ice water, because it was the line every exploiter eventually reaches for. No one asked, as if silence erases dependence, as if labor done under pressure ceases to count because no one formally assigned it. I laughed then, a short, ugly sound. "You didn't ask," I said, "because asking would have meant admitting you needed me." My father snapped, "Watch your tone." And that was it. That was the moment I understood there was nothing left to save. Not the house, not the family, not the lie that I was loved in any way separate from what I prevented from collapsing. For 2 days after that, the house went preternaturally quiet. That kind of quiet only happens when something ugly has already been decided. Celeste stopped speaking to me except in clipped phrases. Ava kept disappearing into my room when she thought I wasn't home and measuring the walls with her eyes. My father moved through the kitchen like a man hoping everyone's anger would expire if he delayed long enough. Then I came home to the changed lock. That was Celeste's answer. Not a conversation, not even a real fight. An erasure. When I looked at my father, some part of me still expected him to stop it, to say this had gone too far, to say, "She's my daughter," to say, "Open the door." He said nothing, and that silence did something permanent. Celeste twirled the new key once and said, "Ava needs the room. You've made it clear this arrangement isn't healthy for anyone." Arrangement. She made my life sound like a temporary furniture rental. I looked at the bags, at the key, at my father. Then I asked the only question that still mattered. "You let her do this?" He rubbed a hand over his mouth and said, without looking at me, "Don't make this harder than it already is." That was the sentence. Not the lock, not the bags, that one. Because cowardice always dresses itself as exhaustion. Don't make this harder. As if truth is what creates pain instead of revealing it. Ava stood behind them, holding my old bedroom blanket over her arm, already acting as if she was moving in. That nearly undid me. Not because of the blanket, because it meant they had imagined me gone before I knew I was leaving. I thought I might scream. Instead, I became very calm. There is a kind of clarity that only arrives when grief finally gets humiliated enough to harden. So I picked up the first bag, then the second, then the banker's box with my files. I carried everything downstairs and out to my car in 3 trips, while Celeste watched like a woman supervising a contractor. On my second trip down the hall, I saw my mother's recipe tin peeking out of one of the bags. That nearly stopped me. My mother had been dead 12 years. That tin was the last object in that house that still felt unquestionably mine. Celeste had packed it in a trash bag. That told me everything about what kind of victory this was supposed to be. By the time the trunk was full, my chest was so tight I could barely breathe. Still, I didn't cry. Not there. Not for them. I went back once for my laptop bag and stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up at the 3 people in that hallway. Celeste with the key, Ava with my blanket, my father with his silence. And I said, "You should all get some rest tonight." Celeste frowned. I kept going. Because when this starts breaking for real, none of you are going to know what hit you. Then I left. I drove until I found a diner attached to a budget motel off the highway. The waitress called me honey without knowing my name. I rented the cheapest room they had. The comforter smelled like industrial detergent and old air conditioning. The bathroom light flickered. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the accidental audio recording my phone had captured in my tote. Celeste saying the room wasn't mine anymore. My father telling me not to make it harder. My own voice at the end, cold, steady. I saved the file under one word: proof. The next morning, the missed calls began. Father, Celeste, Ava, father again. I answered none of them. By noon, there were 11. By nightfall, 17. By day 3, 26. The voicemails were fascinating in the way disasters often are when they're finally happening to someone else. My father's were defensive. "Call me back. We need to talk this through." Celeste's were offended. "Your attitude is making an already stressful situation worse." Ava's were furious. "How dare you take the insurance binder? Mom says that was shared property." That one actually made me smile. Shared property. As if the only reason they had suddenly noticed those files existed was because they were already bleeding from not having them. I rented a small upstairs room above a florist shop from an older woman named Jo Salazar, who had kind eyes and no patience for nonsense. She looked at my overnight bag, the banker's box of files, and my face. Then she said, "You're either leaving something dangerous or becoming something better. Either way, pay on Friday." I liked her instantly. At work, I told no one the details. But my coworker Lena watched me eat crackers at my desk on lunch break and said, "You have that look." What look? The one women get when they finally stop confusing guilt with love. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. By day 6, the first outside call came. Not family, not even a friend. Mortgage servicing. They were looking for my father. Then came the insurance office. Then the county tax department. Not because they had my number officially updated, because my number was still listed in old correspondence as the secondary contact for billing clarification. I sat very still after that. Because that was the real twist. The house wasn't merely disorganized. It was already in administrative freefall. Celeste hadn't pushed me out because I was unnecessary. She had pushed me out because I had become too aware of what she and my father had been hiding. And now they were learning the thing people like them always learn too late. Control is not competence. By day 8, the missed calls had passed 40. By day 9, my father started calling from unknown numbers. By day 10, there were 53 missed calls and 2 voicemails from a lawyer's office regarding urgent property communication. That afternoon, I answered once. Not because I missed them, because I wanted to hear what panic sounds like when it finally loses its manners. My father picked up on the first ring. "Mara?" His voice cracked. I had never heard that before. Not real fear, not in him. "What happened?" I asked. For a second, nothing. Then Celeste's voice came sharp in the background. "Tell her the insurance office called again." So there it was. He swallowed and said, "The bank is reviewing the account. The insurance wasn't reinstated. There's a lien issue on the taxes. Celeste thought—" I almost laughed. Celeste thought. Those words should have been engraved somewhere permanent. Then he said the one thing I had been waiting for since the lock changed. "I didn't know how much you were doing." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have stopped this." Just shocked recognition. That was the poverty of him. Even now, he could see function more clearly than injury. Celeste cut in before I could answer. "This is not the time to be petty, Mara. If you had left the files where they belonged, none of this would—" I interrupted her. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for permission to finish a sentence. "The house is not falling apart because I left," I said. "It's falling apart because you thought you could replace truth with control." Silence. Real silence. Then I kept going. "You wanted the room. You wanted authority. You wanted me gone. What you didn't want was to admit that I was the only reason none of this hadn't exploded sooner." My father said my name softly, the way people say it when they want access to sympathy they never offered while things were still reversible. I did not give it to him. I said, "You were not helpless. You were comfortable. There's a difference." Then I hung up. My hands shook for almost an hour after that, not because I regretted it, because speaking the truth to people who built their entire comfort around your silence does something violent to the body. But the collapse did not stop there. That is what makes real consequences different from cinematic ones. They keep arriving after the speech is over. 2 days later, the lawyer's office called again. This time they left details. A missed filing, a pending county review, documentation required to avoid escalation. 3 separate systems that had each assumed someone competent was handling the other 2. Ava moved out first after a screaming fight with Celeste over money and blame. I know this because a neighbor texted me from a number I barely recognized. "Saw your sister dragging suitcases to someone's car. Everything okay over there?" "Everything okay." I almost laughed. No, everything was simply visible now. My father got quieter. Celeste got sharper, which is what frightened people do when charm stops working. I heard from Lena, who, through one of those small world hospital chains, knew somebody in county records, that there had been 2 in-person visits to the clerk's office in 1 week. That meant panic. That meant they were no longer pretending they could smooth it over with a phone call. Eventually, through a chain of lawyers, frantic paperwork, and late payments, they stabilized the house enough to keep it. Not because they suddenly became honest, because crisis finally did what love never did. It forced them to learn. Months later, my father left a voicemail. No Celeste in the background. No Ava. Just him. He sounded older. Not wiser. Just stripped down. "I should have opened that door," he said. I listened once. Then again. And that was the closest thing to a true apology I ever got. Not enough to restore anything. but enough to confirm that he knew exactly where he had failed. I didn't call back. Some truths arrive too late to become repair. They only become witness. I have my own apartment now, a small one with pale walls, decent light, and drawers that hold only my things. I still work in billing. I got promoted again. I keep my paperwork in color-coded folders because some habits come from trauma and some from skill, and after enough years, the line blurs. Sometimes I still think about that lock, that key in Celeste's hand, Ava carrying my blanket, my father looking at the floor instead of at me. And I think what hurts most is not that they wanted me gone. It's that they thought they could remove me without consequence because none of them had ever understood what I was holding. There are losses that destroy you, and there are losses that introduce you to the truth. That night did the second. It taught me that being needed is not the same as being loved, that people will build their peace on your labor and still resent you for making it look easy. That some families do not love the person you are. They love the collapse you prevent. And if you ever stop preventing it, they call that betrayal. But it isn't betrayal. It is clarity. The room wasn't mine anymore. She was right about that. What she got wrong was everything that came after. Because once that house no longer had access to me, it finally had to face itself. And that, more than losing the room, was what they were never prepared for. Have you ever realized the people who depended on you most respected you the least? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And I'll see you in the next story.